Hello, everybody. Josh Brown here, back for another great episode on Franchise Euphoria. Well, today's episode is brought to you by IndieFranchiseLaw.com, a leading resource in the franchise space to help you if you're considering buying a franchise, turning your business into a franchise, or growing your business through a licensing or franchise structure. So go on, check it out, IndieFranchiseLaw.com. I think you'll find a lot of valuable and free information as you continue to kind of weigh franchising and licensing and the growth of your business. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy today's episode. On today's episode of Franchise Euphoria, we've got Jordan Gross. Jordan is a Northwestern and Kellogg School of Management graduate, a two-time startup founder, a TEDx speaker, and a #1 best-selling author. His upcoming book, The Journey to Cloud 9, provides a new approach to the personal development world by using fictional storytelling to reveal some of life's most meaningful principles. Jordan has been asking hundreds of people around the world how they live their lives on Cloud 9, and he cannot wait to share all of this information with you. How does this relate to franchising? Well, Jordan speaks today about how the franchisee owner-operators, as well as the franchisors, can make sure that as they're building their businesses and starting their businesses, they're focused on making sure that they align their business objectives and their personal goals together. So without further ado, enjoy this interview with Jordan Gross. Hello, Jordan. Welcome to Franchise Euphoria. How you doing?
Hey, Josh. I'm great. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm excited. You know,
Yeah.
you're on the show. This is a little bit of a different kind of
Oh,
show because I
yeah.
think the folks who tune in are used to me always having, a franchisee or franchisor on. But
Yeah.
you were awesome in how you reached out to
Oh,
me and
I
basically
appreciate
said,
that.
"Hey, I'm not a franchisee or franchisor, but I think I
Yeah.
have a lot I can offer to them on how they can get the euphoria side of
Exactly.
the
Yeah. Two
franchise."
words in that title. So,
I love that. So tell me about that.
okay. So, tell you about what? Reaching out, or tell you about the euphoria side, or
No, tell me about
yeah.
you. Tell me about you and sort of what
Yeah.
you do for business folks.
So full disclosure, I'm not a franchisee. I've never owned a franchise. I don't even think I have the desire to ever even consider owning a franchise. But I am a guy who I left the corporate world when I was 23 years old, and I decided that it was not in full alignment with who I wanted to be, with what I was supposed to be doing, right? And I think back to these stories that my mom and dad tell me when I was a kid, where we'd go into I'm from New York, so we'd go into New York City, and I'd want to give money or food to every single homeless person that I saw on the street, right? And I was in a corporate management and leadership program with a big restaurant group. And very quickly, I realized that I was feeding the rich when my mindset, who I wanted to be, what I'm supposed to be doing in this world is, metaphorically feeding the poor. So, in talking about euphoria here, I call it Cloud Nine, the feeling of Cloud Nine, and the journey to Cloud Nine is the book that I have coming out soon, and all this work that I've been doing is all about how we can get this Cloud Nine feeling. But it really all stems from my own journey to Cloud Nine, in which I've spent such a long time, Josh, honestly, going through the motions. And ever since high school, I was just a guy who, on paper, I got good grades and I was an athlete. So that led to the logical transition of playing a sport in college. And then when I got to Northwestern up in Chicago, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I studied economics and got some internships in investment banking and consulting. And people around me told me, hey, that's how you're going to live a good life. So that's what I did. And then it wasn't until I sort of started listening to personal growth and development podcasts and really, reading self-help books that I understood during my restaurant position that, I shouldn't be going to work miserable every single day. I should really be doing something that's more aligned with the person who I know I should be and the person who I want to become. So that's how we got into this whole world, where now what I do is I write, I speak, and I coach. And I write mainly all about, and I do those three things really, mainly all about positivity, happiness, meaning, purpose, and then last but certainly not least, for the last 8 months, I've been studying this beautiful concept of euphoria. So that's why we're here. And I just like Josh said, I reached out on a whim, really, because I'm not a franchise owner, but I figured I can maybe provide some key insights into how to make whatever it is that you're doing, owning your franchise, or just having time with your family, having time with yourself, how you can find these little pockets of euphoria throughout your day, throughout your week, and ultimately throughout your life.
Well, I enjoyed how you reached out, and I think there's a lesson in and of itself there in the terms of, I think all of us get people who reach out quite a bit, right? And sometimes you can tell when people just reach out and it's just for their own good. But you were real thoughtful in how you did it. And so it certainly caught my attention because I really for this podcast usually only have on, franchisees or franchisors. But the reality is this is when you're looking at a franchise or when you're looking to convert your business into a franchise, you have to sort of have your North Star. You got to have, where you're going with it. And to a large extent, that's driven obviously by financial and market concerns, but
Mm-hmm.
it also has to be driven by aligning with your goals, with your
Yeah.
passions, with your interests.
Yeah.
So many people though don't put those two together. They just focus on the money side of it. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll tell you right now. I'll equate this over to what I'm doing in my life, and you mentioned goal setting, and I definitely want to touch on that. So my goal is to be a New York Times best-selling author by the time I'm 30 years old. Right? That's my goal. That's where I want to be. That's like my franchise's vision of where I ultimately want to hit. But I heard something recently that was super profound, and I've heard this concept before, but the way that it was said recently really resonated and hit home. I was listening to Cheryl Strayed talk. She wrote the book Wild that got turned into a movie. Reese Witherspoon played her character. But anyway, she was giving a talk on Oprah's Super Soul Conversations, and she said that when she does yoga, she finds herself getting very frustrated because she can never look like the instructor looks when she does her poses. So one day she went up to the instructor and she said, how come I can't do the poses the way that you do it? And the instructor looked at her and said, the purpose of yoga is not about striking the right pose. The purpose is about reaching for it. And that's when it really hit home that in any goal that I set and any goal that you guys want to set with your businesses, with your franchises, for me, being a New York Times bestseller at the age of 30, it's not about actually, getting that title, but rather it's about two things. It's about one, understanding and realizing the person who I have to become in order to achieve a goal like that. So that is doing my research. That is going on podcasts. That is writing, great content. And number two, it's about enjoying every single moment of that, right? So I know that you're supposed to enjoy the journey more than the actual end destination, but it really took that story for me to drive that home and understand that no, I don't have to become the New York Times bestseller author at age 30. That's just a great place for me to be at. And then it's all about doing everything I can in order to get there.
Well, and obviously that crosses really every spectrum because who said it that the journey is the reward. In other words, the
Gary Vee
idea that,
says that all the time. Yeah.
and I think it came from I think Steve Jobs or
Did he?
had said that, but who knows who he got it from? I mean, all these quotes they kind of make their way around the ether, but the whole point is that you've got to follow that vision now. But the point is too is that when you follow that, you have to have a business focus as well. So how do you work with folks in following their interests, following their passions, but also keeping it related
Mm,
to an objective and verifiable and reachable business goal so that somebody doesn't just get off on a whim where they don't really have a clear idea of how they're going to make a business success of it.
right. So yeah, you're absolutely right. There always has to be something that you're working toward, and this is again, it's about goal setting, right? And I'll give an example in which, so I'm a personal trainer, 6 a.m. to 8:30 in the morning. I have 5 clients where I just wake up, start my day on the right note, and in setting a goal, I've had a client come up to me before and said, I have a wedding in 3 months. I need to lose 15 pounds. And my immediate response is, no, you don't. And they look at me like I'm crazy. But after that, we have a conversation about how, your goal is not to lose 15 pounds. That's a great, light to have at the end of the tunnel. But that's not going to get you there, just focusing on that. And the way to transfer, this whole lesson over to working on a business plan is, if you want to make $1 million in revenue, that's not going to get you there. But rather, just like I said with the yoga example, it's about who you're going to become on the way to $1 million in revenue, right? So two things here. The first thing, and back to the fitness example, is if you think about who that person is going to be who's going to lose the 15 pounds, it's going to be somebody who is in the gym 1 hour a day for 5 days a week, right? So that's what you're going to set. That's your goal, right? So if you're trying to make $1 million of revenue by selling a product, that's not just going to be it. Rather, it's going to be, I'm going to reach out to 100 people a day for 5 days a week. And then that's really what you're going to set. So those are the micro goals that you're setting along the way. And it's more of the process that you're taking in order to get to where you ultimately want to be, right? I said that I had two. So the other one is about reverse engineering. So it's taking that 15 pounds or it's taking that $1 million in revenue and then working your way backward, right? And asking yourself the questions of, well, what's the step right before $1 million in revenue? Well, it's maybe $500,000 in revenue in this amount of time, right? And it's keep working your way back until you ultimately get to present day.
So, as part of a system that you follow, and I think there's something to a process that you do with this. What it's called your Cloud 9 process.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the steps that you help people work through.
Yeah, so the Cloud 9 process is really about discovering meaning and discovering, again, we'll relay it over to business, discovering your core mission or your core values, right? And that really it encapsulates a couple of key ingredients. So a few that I'll mention right off the bat are number one is that it really comes from the inside out. So you need to know yourself more than anything else before you can ever really do anything that is of meaning and of purpose, right? So my first book was called Getting Comfy, Your Morning Guide to Daily Happiness. And comfy was basically a routine that you set up that was totally within you and becoming the best version of yourself, right? So it stands for calm, openness, movement, funny, and you. So that's really the first part of working with somebody. It's all about, having them understand and building the self-awareness of what they want in life. And ultimately, once they understand that, they can move on with the process. So the next phase is I believe in indefinite trial of testing things and making, minimum viable products and piloting things and beta testing. But so that's one. But I also believe in error, and I believe in deliberate failure, actually. So going out and experiencing things that we don't necessarily like or enjoy, but being aware of what parts of those experiences we can take away and we did enjoy or we did realize were beneficial for us. So that's the next phase. It's the error phase. My traditional coaching background comes from Marshall Goldsmith's stakeholder-centered coaching. And in that process, basically, instead of just focusing on self now, you actually use your key stakeholders, who are the people who are closest to you, who are able to provide insights into your life. So your friends, your family, your colleagues, mentors, whoever it may be, you are enlisting them as stakeholders and asking them the simple questions to find out the answers that are often right in front of our face. So you're asking, what are my greatest strengths? What are my greatest weaknesses? Biggest accomplishments? Basically, like, what should I be doing with my life? What should my mission be? Because oftentimes the most clear answers that are right in front of our face, we don't realize because we think it's innate within us. So it really takes talking to people within your network in order to figure out, just how great you truly are. Once you've discovered those, then you kind of work into, creating that minimum viable product, testing it out in the market. And in the market, with what I do, it's actually, who are you as a person? What are you living toward? What's your purpose? What are you going to do? What side project? What meaningful job search? What is it going to be? Then you sort of work through that process, and now you've got all the tools necessary to move forward and live this Cloud 9 life.
And do you just work with business owners? I mean, is that, or do you work with really anybody? I mean, I know you've got a graduate degree, I believe, from Northwestern and from the Kellogg School of Business, and so there's certainly an interest there. But was that your focus?
That's exactly right. So there's definitely an interest there. And that's where I started, obviously. So this, I got that executive leadership coaching certification, and I started with small business owners as well as startup founders in doing this whole process. But little by little, especially with the content I've been coming out with regarding the new book and how it's not just business related, but really Cloud9 Living is about relationships and family decisions and different life choices. I've taken on work with anybody out there, but I only work with 1 to 3 people at a time. So um, yeah, it's all different, which is great because you can come in wanting one thing and then you walk out expecting something totally different.
Now, are you working with people sort of on is it you say, okay, this is a 3 month process we're going to take you through, or is it just sort of a month by month basis? Like, talk a little bit about that engagement with you if somebody's interested.
Yeah, so it's 3 months normally. It's gone to 6, but I've also, I had one guy come in recently who we figured out very quickly that his Cloud9 purpose was to get a new job that was going to support his family. And we worked our butts off in a job search process that got him the salary he needed in the position that he wanted, and that only went for a month and a half, right? So it is normally 3 months to 6 months where you're working through that, those principles I mentioned before, those concepts I mentioned before. And then ultimately, at the end, you decide whether or not you've either gotten what you're looking for or not. You can either keep going or you can reevaluate. So yeah, timing wise, that's kind of how it works.
And so when you said you work with only 1 to 3 people at the same time, talking about that.
Yeah. So for me, I think about whenever I decide to do anything, make a partnership, strike up a deal, work with other companies, work with a coach myself. I always think about me as a consumer first, and I would really need to buy my own services, right? So when I get a coach, think about it this way: I don't want somebody who's got 15 other clients. He only has time for me, or he or she only has time for me once or twice a month. I get 30 minutes. They don't even really remember who I am, right? And it just is, that's not beneficial or meaningful for me. So what I want to do for other people is I want to have enough room and bandwidth within my schedule to only work with 1 to 3 people at a time, so I can spend 2 hours a week with individuals on all the stuff that we're working on. So it's 2 calls per week, half hour to an hour. It's every single week. It is unlimited text message access. It is unlimited email access. It becomes this intimate relationship where it's not just like a coach. It's really like, a best friend who's providing guidance in your life. That's what I want if I were a consumer in this industry. So that's what I want to provide for other people. And then in addition to that, I've also, now I've got this big book launch coming up in a couple of months. I've got some speaking engagements and things like that. So I just don't want to spread myself too thin. I think the biggest disservice I can do for people out there is to take on more than I can chew and have all these clients who I'm not really providing the best value possible to.
So you mentioned the book. So tell me about the book. Do you have a title for it?
Yeah, so the book is called The Journey to Cloud9. Have you ever heard of the book The Alchemist, or maybe The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari by Robin Sharma?
Yes, I've heard both.
Okay, great. So it takes on that kind of approach in which it's a fictional story about these concepts that I want people to put into their lives in order to really live the lives of their dreams, right? So in, working with all of these coaching clients that I've had, in literally I've spoken to hundreds of people asking about their Cloud9 lives and how they're living according to that plan. I've really picked up on key patterns and principles and different momentous events, life occasions that allow you to live a Cloud9 life. But I didn't want to just put that in a story. So what I did was I created a fictional character where in his life he lived according to society and the people around him. And you see that in each momentous occasion he chose based on other people. And ultimately he's in a position in his real life where he's alone and isolated and depressed. But what the book also does is it reveals his Cloud9 life, where in this visualized magical experience, he's able to relive each one of those pivotal moments and see what his life could have looked like had he made decisions that were based off of his own heart, his own gut, and his own intuition. And that's what I call his cloud nine life, where he literally travels through the clouds on this plane, where he travels from cloud one to cloud two, all the way to cloud nine, reliving what the events that occurred through his life, making the other decision, the harder decision, taking the path less traveled, and ultimately understanding what a cloud nine life looks like, so that, from there on, he can sort of give himself this resurgence and live a new and improved life afterward.
That's kind of cool. It's almost like a little parable, a little bit
Exactly.
like the Go-Giver from Bob Burg.
Yeah, from Bob Berg. Yeah. I just chatted with Bob Berg the other day. He's a wonderful guy.
Yeah, he is. Well, that's great. Really enjoy what you're doing. Is there anything else before we end that you want to share, sort of with the audience? If not, obviously we'll have your contact information, everything in the show notes. But if there's anything else that you want to provide, would love to hear.
Yeah. So one of my key objectives, right? Like, people want to impact a million lives. People want to, share a million smiles. My thing is about making people think. So I want to leave you with this very thought-provoking, profound quote that's actually the epigraph, the beginning quote in The Journey to Cloud Nine, and it's by Ed Mylett. Said it beautifully in a podcast once, so I'm going to quote him here. And he said, "Somebody once told me the definition of hell, and it's that on my last day on this earth, the person who I became will meet the person who I could have become, and those two people are complete strangers. But somebody also told me the definition of heaven, and it's that on my last day on this earth, the person who I became will meet the person who I could have become, and those two people are perfectly identical twins." So
Well, I
that's the
love that.
last thing I'll leave you with. Yeah. It's just about, living life according to the story that you want to tell, and how closely are you to that story, right? So that's what I'll leave you with. Go out there, live your Cloud9 lives, have your Cloud9 businesses, create your Cloud9 franchises, and then think about that, that last quote as you make your decisions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jordan.
Thank you, Josh. This was awesome. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Franchise Euphoria. If you enjoyed this episode or have enjoyed the podcast in general, I would really appreciate it if you could go to iTunes and leave me a rating and review. It really helps to get this podcast out to more and more people. So the easy way to do it is go to iTunes and in the search box, put in Franchise Euphoria. You will then see my cover art, and you click on my smiling face that says Franchise Euphoria, and then click on the link that says ratings and reviews. It's that simple, but boy, oh boy, does it mean the world to me when people leave ratings and reviews. And like I said, it really helps get the show out there. Once again, would love it if you would go to iTunes and leave a rating and review if you enjoyed this episode or other episodes of the show. And until the next time, happy franchising.